The grim reality hit me as I looked around. Several men lay motionless on the ground, and Maria was bent over Macario, crying. Others who had been enjoying a drink at the bar now stood uncertain, debating whether it was safe to leave. I spotted Henry kneeling in the corner, focused on one of the bodyguards on the ground. Moving closer, I saw the sadness etched on his face and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay, Henry?" He hesitated, then looked up at me, tears brimming in his eyes. He pushed me down when the chaos started and protected me. He died trying to save me. No one has ever done that for me before. Harper Stevens stood beside me, his expression somber. "That's a tough truth for those in his line of work, Mr. Henry. They take on these risks willingly." "His name was Goldberg," Stevens added quietly. "Tommy Goldberg. He had a wife and 2 kids back in Jacksonville." Stevens leaned in closer, speaking softly. "Is this the first time you've seen something like this in real life?" Henry nodded, his face pale. "It's not like the movies." "No, it's very real," Harper replied. He took Henry's arms and helped him stand, guiding him toward Luis at the bar. Luis held up 2 fingers, and within moments, poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He nodded at me before positioning Henry at the bar, picking up one of the glasses and handing it to him. "The first thing you should do is drink 2 shots of whiskey. And then, as many as you need. Let yourself feel however you need to, but keep moving. Tomorrow will be easier." Davidson scanned the room as he stood up, a look of urgency on his face. "We need to leave. We have 6 locals and 1 American who are no longer with us. I wouldn't want to explain that to the local authorities when they arrive." Wendell and Overhauser walked toward us, with Wendell leaning heavily on Overhauser for support. I noticed a stain on Wendell's shirt. He looked pale but determined. "Are you going to be okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. Wendell nodded, though his face told another story. "The other person was quicker than I thought, but I'll be fine. It doesn't seem serious. We can head down the coast and reach a clinic in a couple of hours." Then he turned his gaze to me. "What about you?" "What about me?" I replied, trying to maintain my composure. Wendell reached out and gently touched my face, his expression filled with concern. He pulled his hand back, and I noticed a mark on his finger. When I reached up to feel my cheek, I winced at the sharp pain. A deep scratch ran from my ear to the side of my mouth. "I think my luck has run out for a while," I muttered. "No," Overhauser replied, his voice steady. "You used up all your luck for many years." He touched my head, and when he pulled his hand back, there was a bit of red on it. "What happened?" he asked, his brow furrowing in concern. I hesitated before checking my head but finally did. It wasn't a serious cut, just a scratch, but it was bleeding. I wiped the blood from my forehead with my fingers. "I don't know how you got through this," Overhauser said, his eyes still on me. "If we find ourselves in trouble again, I want to be right behind you." Not wanting to think about that right now, I walked over to the bar and asked Luis, "What would it cost to fix this quietly? Can we make this go away without drawing attention?" Luis looked around, assessing the messy situation. $110,000 cash, he said, his voice low. I reached into my money belt and pulled out the cash, counting out $111,000 in bills. Along with another $1,000 for free drinks for our friends in the corner for the next month. "Does that work?" "See?" he replied, already on the phone, speaking quickly in Spanish. I hoped people would soon forget about the recent events. I walked over to the 5 witnesses, holding my weapon loosely in my right hand, with Wendell beside me, steady with his shotgun. Overhauser carried an AK-47, the barrel pointed down as Harper Stevens followed closely behind. I noticed a tough-looking man, around 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a suntanned face. In Spanish, I said, "I have an offer for you and your friends." His eyes darted among us, assessing the situation. "What kind of offer?" he asked, his tone cautious. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next could change everything. As the night drew to a close, a thick silence hung in the air, heavy with the aftermath of what had just unfolded. "Forget everything you saw here tonight," the man had said, his tone cold and authoritative. "There's $100 for each of you and a free bar for a month if you keep your mouths shut." Just 4 minutes later, they left, and I turned to Maria, who sat there, cradling Makario's lifeless head in her lap. Tears streamed down her face, each drop a testament to the grief that consumed her. Overhauser had taken care of Makario's belongings, but it was no comfort to her. "Maria, we need to go," I urged softly, kneeling beside her. "Makario is gone. We're leaving, and we'll give you a ride anywhere you want. You don't owe us anything." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "He was my husband," she said, her voice breaking. "He didn't leave us a choice." Now, she was all alone, a reality too painful to bear. She hesitated, struggling against the weight of her loss, but Harper Stevens gently placed a hand on her shoulder. After a moment, she ceased her protest, and I lifted her into my arms, determined to keep her from alerting the local authorities about the chaos we had just escaped. As we stepped outside into the night, Harper knelt beside Tommy Goldberg, who was trying to collect himself. The streets were eerily calm, just shy of 10 p.m., with no police in sight. Our Jeep sat parked a short distance from the El Dorado, while Davidson, Henry, and their team waited in a Lincoln Town car. "Follow us," I instructed, glancing back at Maria as I helped her into the vehicle. "We're heading to the harbor. A friend has lent me a yacht to get us down the coast." The town car offered more space, so Harper and the remaining guard stayed behind to monitor Maria and Tommy's remains while Davidson drove. As we wound our way toward the waterfront, Henry suddenly broke the silence. "6 men died back there. How can you just act like nothing happened?" "We're not," Overhauser replied sharply. "We're trying to get out of here before things spiral out of control." I held up a hand to calm the tension. "Mr. Henry, we're not ignoring what happened. Dell is hurt and needs medical attention. One of your bodyguards was killed, and I nearly sustained serious injuries. This situation won't end well for us because we got involved with the locals. We were the targets, they attacked us, and we had to defend ourselves. You're shocked because this isn't your reality. It's ours. Just listen to Harper and keep moving. Return to your life, and soon this will feel like a bad dream." Henry fell silent as we approached the boat. It took 2 trips to ferry everyone to the 50-footer, a sleek vessel that a Chinese general had allowed me to borrow in exchange for my discretion on certain matters. It wasn't huge, but it was quick, equipped with 2 bathrooms, a well-stocked kitchen, a complete medical kit, and room for patient care. There were only 4 sleeping areas, but the deck had enough space for others to rest if needed. Overhauser had been relentless about teaching me the right boating terminology. "You need to know your stuff," he insisted. "You can't just call things whatever you want." "I'm not a sailor," I shot back. "I pay for this boat, so I'll call it what I want." Despite his nagging, I knew his skills were invaluable. He had been a medic and could handle emergencies far from any hospital. After settling Maria in one of the sleeping areas, he gave her an injection, ensuring she was comfortable. She rolled onto her side, falling into a peaceful sleep, her beautiful skin and long, thick black hair framing her face. I couldn't shake the guilt that washed over me. How could I face her again, knowing the fate of her husband? I knew I'd crossed a line, and if I went any further, it could lead to serious consequences. "We'll check on her," Overhauser said, pulling me from my thoughts. "But she should rest for 8 to 10 hours. I'll help Wendell stay steady until we reach a clinic in Puerto Cortez. It's a decent-sized city just across the border in Honduras." Harper Stevens and another bodyguard, a man named Larry, took the wheel. "This is quite a vehicle, Mr. McCarthy," Stevens remarked, glancing at me. "When I heard you had left the country, I figured you'd be in a tough spot by now." "Good guess, but thankfully, there are plenty of untapped oil fields out there," and companies ready to explore them. I've been doing okay. What about you? I asked, genuinely curious. It took me about 6 months to fully heal from what Grove did to my ankle and leg, but I'm back on my feet, he replied with a hint of pride. He was a lucky guy. If he'd had the courage to give me another shot, I would have done things differently. But he turned out to be a decent man. He even married my sister. He's a constable in London now, by the way. I went with the bank for better pay and benefits. I have a 17-year-old daughter who's going to NYU. She's something special. She's so different from me. I think she'll end up in the diplomatic service and won't have to face the hardships I did. She's going to achieve a lot more than I ever dreamed. For a big guy, he seemed surprisingly gentle as he spoke. There was something about kids that softened even the toughest of people. A deep sadness washed over me, and I pushed it away, hiding it where old dreams lingered. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching and saw Overhauser standing there. "Let's go below deck and take care of that wound, boss," he said, his eyes assessing my face. I had been pressing a cloth against my cheek, but it was soaked through, and I had to keep wiping the blood from my left eye. We headed toward the bunks, but Overhauser guided me to a small clinic area with a cot. "Calm her down," he instructed, working quickly. "I'll give Wendell some strong pain relief to help him rest. He really needs it before we reach the clinic in Puerto Cortez." As I lay down on the cot, exhaustion overtook me. I closed my eyes, the weight of the night pressing down as I surrendered to the darkness, hoping against hope that morning would bring clarity and a way forward from this nightmare. I winced as he peeled the cloth from my cheek. It had stuck to my skin, pulling away some of the healing flesh beneath. A sharp sting flared where the cut was, and I knew he was cleaning it. "That's quite a cut, boss," he said, his tone serious. "I'll do my best, but you might want to get it looked at the clinic. It could leave a noticeable scar." I chuckled dryly, though the thought of it gnawed at me. "Well, that could be tricky for my job," I replied, trying to keep the mood light. He laughed softly, a knowing sound that suggested he was about to deliver an unwelcome truth. "I hate to break it to you, but you weren't exactly a heartthrob before this happened. Just do your best, I believe in you." He reached for some butterfly strips, the kind that would hold the cut together until a doctor could take over. "Let me put some cream on the cuts, and then I'll start. It's still going to hurt." I managed a weak laugh at the prospect of pain. He was right, I'd never been one to shy away from it, but I wasn't laughing once he finished. Surprisingly, the process hadn't been too bad. He cleaned the blood from my forehead, then buzzed my hair short, revealing the neat patches of skin that were now covered in long band-aids running from the back of my head to the front. "These are just minor scratches," he assured me. "The band-aids will stop the bleeding, and by morning, they should look better." As we sat in silence, the yacht gently swayed, its engines humming as they propelled us through the dark water. The rhythmic slapping of waves against the hull was almost soothing, and somewhere not too far off, a buoy chimed in the stillness of the early morning hours. "Michael," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. I opened my eyes. He usually called me boss, but when he used my name, I knew it was serious. "We've been through a lot together in the last 5 years, haven't we?" His tone shifted from light-hearted to contemplative. "It's all been fun, Ben," I replied, a hint of sarcasm lacing my words. "But if it weren't risky, your wife would have to stop volunteering at the animal shelter and get a real job." He smiled, though it was tinged with nostalgia. Ben didn't talk about his wife much, but he cherished those moments when they were with friendly people. Some of those stories were genuinely touching. "I can't quite explain it, but this feels different," he said, his expression darkening. "I have a bad feeling about everything. It's hard to feel good about what we're dealing with." "It's more than that," I added, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "I don't know what's in that briefcase Davidson has, but I have a hunch." "I think you do too," Ben replied, looking at me with that knowing gaze. "It's money. A lot of money." I nodded slowly. Yeah, I think it's a large sum. I heard rumors about you getting rid of a cashier's check for 10 million. That's got to be an exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration, he said flatly. You got rid of 10 million in an untraceable cashier's check. Why? I had my reasons, temporary insanity, I replied defensively. My reasons, Ben. I don't expect you to understand. Do you think she sent you another check? I can't think of any other reason for Davidson and Henry to be here with that briefcase. How can you trust anyone? 10 million could tempt even the richest people. We don't know anything about the bodyguard, and Stevens has a daughter. He could set her for life if we all just disappeared. I trust Wendell with my life, I said, feeling a flicker of hope. But untraceable money? Even for me, that's a slippery slope. I have a life in Tampa, but it has crossed my mind. It's probably crossed everyone's mind. That's why we need to finish this, I said, standing up carefully, regaining my balance. Find Davidson, Henry, and the other bodyguard. Send them down to the den. Ben looked at me with concern but shook his head, knowing full well what I meant. The den was the heart of the yacht, a spacious room with a plush couch, several chairs, a pool table, and a well-stocked bar. I made my way there, checking my watch. It was 2 a.m., close to the witching hour. It was time to end the drama that Deirdre had created. Destroying the check, if it existed, would put an end to all the doubts and fears swirling around this yacht. Davidson and Henry entered after Ben called them. Davidson looked ready for business, his pants neatly pressed and shoes shining. Henry, on the other hand, was barefoot, his clothes rumpled as if he had just rolled out of bed, a far cry from the polished lawyer I remembered from Bailey's office 5 years ago. I'll go get Stevens, Ben said, moving to leave. I noticed he had a large item slung over his shoulder. But just before he could step out, Larry, a tall, slim man with a serious demeanor, stepped into the room. I left Stevens at the wheel, Larry said. He thought I might enjoy this more. I settled onto the couch, motioning for Davidson and Henry to join me. Ben positioned himself behind the pool table, his watchful gaze keeping an eye on us. Davidson placed the briefcase on the table between us and retrieved a small key from his coat pocket, unlocking the handcuff that secured it. With a twist, he opened the briefcase, revealing 2 envelopes nestled inside. I had a guess about one, but the other was a mystery. I picked up the thicker envelope, noticing the handwriting scrawled on the front. Turning it over, I read the note inside. Michael, please read this. Deirdre. What is this? I asked, tossing the letter toward Davidson, who caught it deftly. Miss Lancaster asked us to bring this to you, he said. She wanted you to read it. And why would I do that? I shot back, my irritation flaring. I can't say why. I just know she hopes you will. I'm not interested, I replied, dismissing the note with a wave. Instead, I turned to the thinner envelope, tearing it open. A folded piece of paper slipped out, and I didn't need to unfold it completely to see the words that made my heart race, a $10 million check. Anyone have a lighter? I muttered, a mix of disbelief and anger coursing through me. Michael, think carefully. I know you have strong feelings for your ex-wife, but we also know you could use the money. Don't let pride stand in the way of practical needs. I've heard you lost $2 million this year. I don't know what you have saved, but 10 million could help. Mr. Davidson, I interrupted, my tone firm, I appreciate your insight, but you don't know everything. Sure, I lost 2 million this year, but I made 3 million last year. I might just be down to my last million, but if I were down to my last $5, I'd return that check to Deirdre and keep my distance. I won't accept anything from her, now or ever. Still, I have to ask, Davidson pressed. Are you really sure about this? If you don't want it, give it to charity. Donate it to Tom Goldberg's family or at least part of it. How about the animal shelter where Carrie works? Ben chimed in, 10 million could help a lot of stray dogs. I looked up just as his words hung in the air, and my mind reeled with possibilities. But then, before I could respond, everything changed. Suddenly, Larry the bodyguard pointed his weapon at us, his expression tense. "Don't any of you move." The atmosphere shifted dramatically, tension coiling around us like a thick fog. The stakes had just risen higher, and I knew this was only the beginning. "Do you three think you have anything to hide?" Davidson's voice was firm as he stood up and turned around, scanning the room. "I want to be sure you're not concealing anything." "Come on, Davidson. Just stand up," McCarthy urged, his tone impatient. Davidson rose slowly, turning his back to us. He opened his shirt and patted his pockets, letting any potential weapons or hidden items fall to the floor. "Okay, sit back down, McCarthy. Now it's your turn," McCarthy instructed, leaning forward as if he were eager to expose my secrets. "I've heard rumors about the little things you carry. Stand up and show me." I hesitated, stealing a glance at Overhauser's lifeless body in the corner of the room. A chill of fear gripped me, mingling with a fierce determination. I only had a small derringer tucked away, a desperate tool that could either save me or seal my fate. With a shaky breath, I lifted it and, using 2 fingers, tossed it over to him slowly. McCarthy caught it deftly, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Well, well, well," he said, examining the tiny gun with a satisfied grin. "This is quite the hidden gem. I think I'll keep it." I felt my pulse quicken as I glanced toward the doorway where Larry had entered earlier. He caught my eye and flashed a knowing smile. "Don't count on any help from the big man," he said casually. "He was tough, but he didn't make it out alive." "You shot him?" Davidson's voice rose, laced with anger. "I wouldn't have approached him directly," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "He was too good at his job. It was easier to take him out than to think about teaming up." I worked hard to maintain a blank expression, wishing Davidson couldn't read the fear I felt creeping inside me. McCarthy smiled wider, but I noticed his grip on the weapon didn't waver. "And what about your friend Wendell?" McCarthy continued, his tone taunting. "I took care of him earlier, just to be safe. He didn't stand a chance." In that moment, I resolved that even if it meant my own end, I would stand up to this threat. "Oh, and your friend from the bar?" McCarthy added casually. "I had to deal with her too. Unfortunate, really, but she didn't make it through the night." My heart sank as I began to rise, anger and grief washing over me. But before I could take a step, Davidson's hand shot out, gripping my wrist firmly. "Don't," he warned. "Trust me, that won't end well for you." "There are only 3 of us left," Larry interjected, his grin unwavering. "You 3 are still here because I might want to keep 1 or 2 of you around. You can never be too sure." Davidson remained calm, even in the face of such a threatening man. "It wouldn't make sense to harm your only allies after coming this far. We're unarmed and mean no harm." "I hope so," Larry said, his voice cool and calculating. "But I could set this yacht to explode and escape in the motorboat, leaving you all here. I'm only keeping you around for my own reasons." He turned his gaze to the check lying on the table. "Henry, you're the least useful of the bunch. Go grab that check and bring it halfway to me. Set it down carefully, then step back. Do it slowly, and keep your hands in sight." I did as instructed, my hands trembling as I picked up the check, feeling the weight of what it represented. I placed it down slowly before stepping back. Larry leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he studied it. $10 million, he said, a low whistle escaping his lips. 10 million, cashable anywhere. His fingers traced the edges of the check as if trying to unravel its secrets. "Did you win the lottery?" Davidson replied, "Yes, basically. Even if I have to figure out how to cash it, I'll still have millions." Larry scoffed, "I hate to break it to you, but I'm a banker. It's risky to be too curious about this. If you try to cash it at a bank, things might not go well for you. If any officials find out, it could get serious real fast. But if you give it to me, I can help you cash it, for a fee. I could take you to the bank, but you might end up alone with the others. I could just vanish after the deal. Why shouldn't I just take the check and get rid of you right now? Larry's eyes glinted with menace. Davidson stood his ground, undeterred. Turning against us would be a big mistake. If you leave them tied up, we could take the boat and be gone before they get free. There are places like Hong Kong and other parts of Asia where a check like this can be cashed without a hitch. They handle much larger amounts. We'd be in a place where it's hard for you to harm me. It might be smarter for you to run with more resources and a better chance to hide. Why would you help me? Larry challenged. You could easily turn on me. Because it's not my money, Davidson replied, his voice steady. I have more than enough. I have someone who can give me more money whenever I want. I don't need the check. Honestly, I don't care if you escape or not. The people who have been hurt here don't matter to me. I'm just a banker. I watched Davidson's words sink in. Larry seemed lost in thought, likely daydreaming about a better life ahead. But I didn't like the idea that this could be his last chance. Suddenly, Davidson's eyes widened as he staggered back. A large figure stood in the doorway, weapon drawn. We all watched in shock as the man's weapon fell from his hand, and he crumpled to the ground. Stevens. Davidson rushed to him, fear gripping his voice as blood pooled from Stevens' mouth. Sorry. Tough situation, Stevens gasped, his strength fading. Don't apologize, Davidson said, his tone urgent. You saved us. We thought he had taken you. He did, the big man replied, struggling to open his eyes. But it's not easy to take down someone like me. As his eyes began to shut, a shiver ran through his body. Davidson cradled his head gently, tapping his face lightly to keep him conscious. Stevens, listen to me. Just hold on a little longer. Your daughter, the one in college, she'll have every chance to finish her studies, wherever she wants. When she steps into the world, she will always have the support of Hunt Bank and Lancaster Oil behind her. Stevens seemed to respond, though I wasn't sure if he could still hear. And when we return, I'll tell her that her father acted bravely, doing his duty to the very end. I thought I saw a flicker of a smile cross his lips before his eyes closed completely, and he drifted away. I turned to Overhauser, but he was already gone. A heavy weight settled in my chest as Henry walked over to Larry, seizing the weapon from his hand and firing 4 more times. I know he's gone, but it made me feel better, Henry muttered, his expression hardening. I rushed to the clinic, already bracing myself for what I would find. Wendell lay wrapped in a blanket, and as I unwrapped it, a wave of sadness washed over me. The sight was heartbreaking. I couldn't shake the image of him lying there, too confused to fight back. Next, I approached Maria's bunk. She had been wrapped too, and pulling back the blanket revealed a tragic scene. Her features had softened in death, making her look as if she were merely sleeping. Perhaps I felt worse for her because, unlike Wendell and Overhauser, she hadn't been a part of our tight-knit team. Maybe she hadn't always made the best choices, but she hadn't intended to cause us harm. As I stood in that clinic, surrounded by the weight of loss, I felt an overwhelming sense of grief and resolve. We may have lost friends today, but their sacrifices wouldn't be forgotten. And as long as I was alive, I would carry their memories with me. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. I had fallen in with the wrong crowd, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Deirdre would still be alive if I had left her at the bar or just dropped her off somewhere on our way to the powerboat. When I returned to the cabin, I found Davidson and Henry sitting there, sipping on some very expensive whiskey. Overhauser, Larry, and Harper Stevens lay sprawled where they had fallen, covered with blankets, except for Larry, who lay uncovered, exposed for everyone to see as if he didn't deserve respect and death. There's not much we can do for them now, Davidson remarked, staring into his glass. We should be at the next port soon where we can hire a plane to take their bodies back, I replied, looking at Larry's lifeless form. "He doesn't deserve a burial. I think I'll just toss him over the side and let the sea take him." "I think he was married," Henry interjected. "He might have had kids. Whether we take him back or leave him here, we should keep this quiet. Why punish his family for something they had nothing to do with?" "Matt, if I were you, I'd start considering a different job," Davidson said with a serious look in his eyes. Henry shot him a surprised glance. "You'll never be a successful lawyer," Davidson continued. "You're too kind. Lawyers need to be tough, that's just how it is." "Some of the best people I've known have been lawyers," Henry countered, pointing to the empty glass in front of me. "Pour yourself a drink, McCarthy." I poured a generous shot of whiskey, raising my glass in solidarity. Davidson and Henry did the same, and we clinked glasses, toasting to our absent friends. We sipped the fine whiskey while the dark waves spread beneath us, leading us into the night. An hour later, I found myself at the helm of the yacht. It almost felt like it steered itself, but I had some experience with boats, and as we neared busier waters and the city where we could arrange to send the remains back to the States, I had to stay alert. We were equipped with radar, sonar, and radios, but sometimes just watching the sea was the most helpful approach. I thought I'd have a moment to reflect on what had happened, but then Davidson approached me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "No," I replied. "But I thought you'd be sleeping for a bit." "I don't need as much sleep now. Plus, I wanted to talk to you about a few things." "As long as they're not about Deirdre Lancaster," I interrupted. "Julian Gutman and Deirdre got married 3 months after you left the States." I felt a surge of anger but held it back. "I respect my elders, so I won't lose my temper, but if you don't leave soon, I might have to ask you to." Davidson raised an eyebrow. "You could try, but you can't stop thinking about Deirdre. Is that why you're here? Did she send you to update me on her life?" "I know she's a big client of the Hunt Bank, but how far will you go for her?" "It's not like that. Just let me speak for a couple of minutes, and then I'll be done. She pulled me into a mess, and now she's trying to disturb my peace. But fine, make it quick. Deirdre and Julian married 3 months after you left. She sought a divorce a year later after he had several public affairs. Before the divorce could be finalized, he tried to harm her, but the person he hired was actually an undercover officer. When they tried to arrest him, he panicked, leading to an unfortunate series of events. He was charged with serious offenses, including the death of a police officer. The state attorney didn't offer any deals. He was convicted and secured a strong sentence. He's in prison now, likely for a long time. I can't reveal my sources, but I've heard he's living a very different life now, though I doubt it's good. I stared into the dark water beneath us, attempting to find some comfort in the thought of Gutman facing justice, but it only deepened my sadness over what had been lost. I've gotten rid of the check and the letter from her. Now I know how her life is. Do me a favor, Davidson, when we reach land, I'll arrange for a respectful burial for Maria at a local church. If they can't locate her family, I'll be taking Wendell and Overhauser's remains back to their families. You should take care of your responsibilities back home and tell Deirdre to leave me alone. I want to forget her, I don't want her bringing more trouble to innocent people. You know that if you just cashed the check 5 years ago, none of this would have happened, right?" Davidson replied. "Yeah, I know," I said, feeling the weight of regret settle in. "That makes it even harder, but I just couldn't do it." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "I understand more than probably anyone else. I get why you couldn't, but that doesn't make it any easier. That's the tough part of life, you always have to face the consequences of your choices, no matter how long it takes for them to catch up with you." July 23, 2014. I flew into Jacksonville International Airport for the first time in 10 years. The sun blazed brightly, and the temperature hit 92 degrees Fahrenheit. As we circled the airport, I noticed dark, thunderous clouds gathering in the distance. I had forgotten how predictable the summers were in Jacksonville, hot during the day, with a heat that felt like a heavy blanket pressed against your face, often followed by the rumble of afternoon thunder and refreshing storms that felt great as long as you stayed safe inside. After renting a car and taking care of some business, I bought some flowers and made my way to Evergreen Cemetery. Finding the graves was straightforward enough, though the cemetery had expanded and added new sections since my last visit. Granite headstones marked the resting places of Eileen and Patrick McCarthy. I bought vases for the roses, Mom's favorite flowers, and the sunflowers that Dad, a tough Irishman, had always told me were his favorite because they had been his mother's. I expected the graves to look a bit lonely. Evergreen was well kept, the grounds meticulously maintained, but it had been a decade since I'd last visited, and there was no one else left to remember them. Yet the graves were well cared for, vases placed neatly at each site, even though the flowers had wilted. I looked around, spotting only a few distant visitors. Occasionally, church groups would come to honor the forgotten graves, taking special care to clean them up and pay their respects. As I stood there, memories flooded back, moments of joy and heartache, the echoes of laughter mingling with the weight of loss. It was a stark reminder that time moves on, but some wounds never truly heal. I placed the flowers carefully in the vases, feeling a connection to my parents that had been absent for so long. I stood there for a while, allowing the memories to wash over me, promising myself that I would return more often, that I would keep their memories alive in my heart. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the past still had its grip on me. I was back, but the shadows of my choices lingered, and I knew I had a long way to go before I could find any semblance of peace. I found myself standing at the small memorial, leaving flowers in honor of those who had passed, whoever they were. Their kindness resonated with me, and I intended to leave the flowers and move on, but instead, I ended up sitting there for an hour, lost in my thoughts. A swirl of sadness and loss washed over me for lives that were once so precious, now just memories. With the whole day stretching out before me, I decided to drive around downtown. Before long, I found myself heading south on US 17. I took the off-ramp, merging onto the divided road that veered right. Memories began flooding back, images of buildings like the old pharmacy and a few small shops that looked exactly as I remembered them. O'Brien's had expanded at least 2 stores beyond what I recalled, a favorite spot from my past. I wondered what additions O'Brien had made to fill that extra space. It was just before 7 p.m., and the parking lot was still half empty. I parked by the curb and walked up to the front door. The sign above still read O'Brien's in bright gold letters. The entrance had transformed, featuring wooden swinging doors reminiscent of those in old Western movies, but with glass panels above the wood. An automatic sensor opened one door for people entering and the other for those leaving, making it feel more inviting than before. At the end of the bar, 2 additional doors caught my eye. One had steps and a railing for easy access, while the other was equipped with a ramp for wheelchairs. Everything about this place felt welcoming. I reached out to open the door, and it swung open effortlessly. Stepping inside, I looked around. The long wooden bar seemed longer than I remembered, clearly indicating that the place had grown. There were tables for patrons to sit and enjoy drinks, a large area for dancing, and a section dedicated to pool tables and games. Despite the time of day, the bar was mostly empty, which was typical for a Wednesday evening. Across the room, a large sign announced O'Brien's Late Night Eats. That must have been the result of the expansion, I thought, as O'Brien had taken over the neighboring shops and transformed them into a late-night restaurant for those seeking a bite after hours. I suspected he could lock those doors with a push of a button from behind the bar. While the occasional argument might punctuate the bar's lively atmosphere, it didn't spoil the dining experience. O'Brien had balanced a spirited side with a calmer dining area beautifully. "You here for a checkup or just to have a drink?" a friendly bartender asked, her smile genuine even if her tone held a hint of sharpness. I leaned in closer to the bar, intrigued. She wore shorts that accentuated her long legs, prompting my curiosity. "How tall are you?" I asked, a playful edge to my voice. "Ever hear that you might ask too many questions? If you want to know what we serve, I can chat about that. And please, keep your eyes up here," she replied, a teasing glimmer in her eyes. I enjoyed the back and forth. "I guess you're about 6 feet tall without shoes. With those heels, you must be quite a sight. Did you ever dance or perform? Vegas? New York, maybe? I'm sorry if I was staring, you really do stand out," I added, trying to keep the conversation flowing. She didn't seem surprised. Probably, she received compliments often. "Are you going to order a drink?" "Most people come here for that," she replied. "Coors in a glass, please," I said, appreciating the classic choice. "That's how we serve it," she said, turning around to grab a bottle and a mug. With a deft hand, she poured the drink, filling the mug just right. When she finished, she looked at me, attempting to suppress a smile. "You must really like your Coors." "Something like that. I appreciate nice things, and Coors is a nice beer," I replied, taking a sip of the cold brew. She looked me over and then pointed to the scar on my face, which ran from under my ear to the edge of my lip. "Are you a pirate?" she asked, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Excuse me?" I laughed, taken aback. "That scar makes you look like a pirate. Or maybe a tough guy," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. "Not a pirate, but I might fit the tough guy description." "You can touch it if you want," I said, leaning in slightly, testing her curiosity. That almost drew out a smile. "Does that line ever work?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "About half the time," I admitted, shrugging. She laughed lightly. "You must meet some interesting people." "I think you'll find that most of our customers are too smart to fall for that," she replied, her smile returning. "That's fine. I'm not looking to date your customers, but the staff. That's another story. Sorry, our waitresses don't date during work hours. It just causes too many issues. What they do outside of work is their choice," she explained, shaking her head. "I was actually thinking about the bartenders," I corrected, intrigued. She shook her head again, her expression playful yet firm. "How old are you?" I paused, studying her. She looked more mature than I initially thought but still lovely. 38. "But you look like you've held up well. Are you 45? 50? "I don't have any issues with age, and I'm not into younger women," I said, my tone casual but genuine. "But I'd love to grab a coffee next door on your break. What could it hurt?" This time, she smiled a little more genuinely. "I'm closer to 60 than 50. And if I had kids, you could be one of them." "Older than I guessed," I admitted. "But I'm not asking for anything serious, just a cup of coffee and a chat." "What's the harm?" She leaned in slightly, her posture shifting as she considered my proposal. "But what would be the point? You seem like the kind of man who doesn't enjoy small talk. I've met many like you before. Drink or coffee usually leads to something more." "Even if that's true, would it be so bad?" I asked, intrigued by her hesitance. "You seem like an interesting person, and I have stories from my life that might entertain you. I might never come this way again, and we may not meet again. Haven't you ever heard the saying, 'What happens in Jacksonville stays in Jacksonville'? Over the years, many women have told me that my smile is my best feature." I leaned closer, locking eyes with her. "Can you honestly say that when no one is around, you won't be even a little curious?" Curiosity gnawed at me as I wondered what life might have been like for O'Brien if I hadn't stepped into the bar that night. "If you keep being friendly with my wife, McCarthy," he warned, his voice low and serious, "I'll have to remind you where you stand." I turned on my barstool to find O'Brien readying himself to swing at me. "O'Brien," I said, trying to diffuse the tension, "your wife?" He just smiled, a familiar grin that eased the air between us. I stepped forward, pulling him into a hug, then spun him around effortlessly. Being taller, I lifted him off the ground, and for a moment, we both laughed like old friends. I patted his back, but soon he said, "Come on, Mike, let me down. This is kind of awkward." I set him back on his feet, taking in the changes time had etched onto his face. He looked older, but still strong. Most of his hair was still intact, though it was peppered with gray. He had filled out a bit around the middle, but his arms remained muscular, a testament to the fighter he once was. Even back in the day when I frequented his bar, no one dared to challenge him. My eyes drifted to his wife, a striking blonde with a warm smile that lit up the room. She leaned toward him, her charm evident as she greeted him with genuine affection. It should have been funny, a tall, graceful woman interacting with a shorter, stocky man, but it wasn't. I had to swallow the pang of jealousy that bubbled up inside me. "Mike, I'm glad I recognized you before jumping to conclusions," O'Brien said, smirking. "Don't mind him," his wife chimed in. "He's just used to people being friendly with me. That's why he knows I can handle myself." O'Brien turned to me with a hint of pride in his eyes. "Let me introduce you to my charming friend. This is Michael McCarthy, the son of an old friend who practically grew up in this bar." She reached out to shake my hand. "Nice to meet you, Michael. How come I've never seen you here before?" I paused for a moment, glancing at the bar that had been my childhood playground before answering, "I've been away for a long time. O'Brien, how about pouring me a beer?" As O'Brien poured the frothy brew, he looked back at me, his curiosity piqued. "You've got to tell me what brings you back. It's been too long." He settled next to me, accepting a cold beer from his wife. "To old friends and the surprises that keep coming back," he toasted, clinking his mug against mine. "I'll drink to that, and to those who never really age. Honestly, I thought you might be long gone by now." I chuckled, taking a sip of my beer. "Well, instead of disappearing, I see you found one of the kindest companions I've ever met. That's a remarkable partnership, especially given your age." O'Brien playfully tapped my chin with his fist, quick enough that I didn't have time to react. "Yeah, it's definitely a partnership for sure." He leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Sometimes we connect more often in a day than I can count. Actually, I shouldn't exaggerate, we don't get together 2 times a night anymore, but once usually does the trick." "Impressive, O'Brien. You give me hope for when I get older like you," I replied, laughing. He took a big gulp of his beer and wiped the foam from his lips. "So, what brings you back to town, Mike? Davidson mentioned you didn't plan on returning." "I don't think anyone blamed you." I sighed, contemplating my reasons. "An old friend from high school passed away about a week ago. His family reached out to me about the funeral tomorrow. I also wanted to visit my parents' graves. There are a few other things I need to take care of. Maybe I'll spend an extra day here, and then I'll be on my way." O'Brien nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I'm glad to see you again and to meet your lovely new wife, but I can't shake the feeling that you won't return. Is there really nothing left for you here?" I glanced down the bar at Sugar, who was chatting with 3 customers, her eyes sparkling with life. "So what have you been up to for the past 10 years, or at least the last 5? "Same as when Davidson and Matt Henry found me in Guatemala," I said, recalling the whirlwind of my recent past. "I've traveled to maybe 50 countries and touched all 7 continents in the last decade, flying in and out of more airports than I can count. I've faced some rough times, encountered health issues, and had a few risky adventures. I've survived tough situations, but on the bright side, I've seen stunning waterfalls that few have ever witnessed. I even floated over what looked like the lost city of Atlantis. Turns out they were just coral structures where ships hadn't gone. Once, I found myself alone in a small boat in the Indian Ocean with a large shark swimming nearby." O'Brien shook his head in disbelief, taking another drink. "Mike, you make me wish I was young again and could join you on those adventures." I glanced toward the entrance as more patrons filtered into the bar, older couples mixed with younger singles. The guys strutted in, trying to look stylish, while the girls, clad in fashionable outfits, radiated confidence and charm. They were here for music, drinks, good times, and perhaps something a little special. It all felt sweet and innocent, even if the guys saw themselves differently. For a moment, I felt like a visitor from another time, stepping into a world that was both familiar and foreign. It might sound idealistic, I said to O'Brien, but there are nice moments. Mostly, though, it's pain and fear. It's working long hours on projects that don't succeed and eating in little restaurants that leave you feeling unwell. It's tough to feel like you don't fit in. Then why do you keep doing it? O'Brien asked, genuinely curious. I enjoy it. I'm good at it. And honestly, there's nothing else I really want to do, I admitted, though I felt the weight of my words. Is it that you can't do anything else, or that you don't want to? I pondered that for a moment. They're the same. Have you thought about settling down somewhere, Mike? There are so many beautiful cities in the world and plenty of jobs in the oil industry. Not really. A city is just a city, no matter how pretty it is. When you can go anywhere, it doesn't really matter. There will always be people. A look of sadness crossed his face, and without needing to say much, he conveyed his understanding. You've never found the right partner. I did, I replied quietly. But I lost her a long time ago. I signaled to Sugar, and she left her group of fans to come over. Get us another round, please, I said, leaning on the bar. She filled our glasses, her smile brightening the dimly lit room. So, Michael, she began, leaning casually against the bar, how did you get that scar? I hesitated for a moment, weighing the truth. A man was trying to hurt me. I had to defend myself. Sugar glanced between her husband and me, her eyes wide with curiosity. Does that happen a lot in your line of work? Fortunately, not too often, I replied, before shifting the spotlight back to them. Now it's my turn. One of you tell me how you two met. How did an older guy end up with such a wonderful partner? Oh, it was all about his connections, Sugar chimed in, a playful grin on her face. O'Brien tapped me lightly on the back of the head, feigning annoyance. Mind your words, McCarthy. I'm not that old. Sugar reached out to touch his hand, an affectionate gesture that revealed their bond. I had slowed down my career in Miami, she said, her gaze drifting momentarily into the distance. You mean you retired? I asked, intrigued. Were you a performer? Yes, for a few years in Vegas and New York. But I also went to school at night, earned my accounting degree, and eventually started managing finances for some people in the industry. She paused, then added, after that, I began a successful business offering companionship. My eyebrows raised at that, but she continued, noticing my reaction. It wasn't that kind of companionship. There are always wealthy people looking for attractive company at events. I made sure my business was respectable to avoid any issues. I told my friends, if you want to spend time with them privately, that's your choice. Just keep it separate from work. She shot O'Brien a glance that was full of unspoken affection, almost convincing me that their love story was genuine, despite my initial skepticism. I also dabbled in talent management for a while, she added, got married twice, and went through 3 divorces. There's a story there. O'Brien chuckled softly, shaking his head. Eventually, I decided I didn't need more money. I wanted a place by the water where I could walk on the beach in shorts and barefoot. I found it and was happy. Sugar pointed at O'Brien. Then this guy came along, and everything shifted. I laughed. I can totally see that. Tell him the full story, Sugar. How you found the man you've been searching for all your life. She rolled her eyes playfully. I hadn't seen my brother in years, and I heard he and his wife were having issues. I came up to see if I could help, but this guy had already helped fix their marriage and maybe even saved his life. O'Brien nodded in agreement. Chris has been my friend for 30 years. His wife reached out to me, saying they were having problems. I didn't do anything brave, I just sat him down and spoke to him like an old friend. I shared some advice, and he and his wife managed to fix their lives. I'm just happy it led me to meet Sugar. Sugar continued, my brother told me what happened, so I decided to meet this person before I went back south. One Friday night, I walked into O'Brien's, and everything just unfolded. The look they exchanged at that moment spoke volumes. It was clear they understood each other perfectly. This was last year, O'Brien said, his voice warm with affection. You're quite the charmer, aren't you? We got married 2 months after that first night, Sugar said, her voice glowing with happiness. Neither of us is young anymore. O'Brien smiled, leaning closer to her. When you reach our age, you realize time is limited. You meet someone, and you don't want to say goodbye. You left a nice life by the beach to come to Jacksonville and work in a bar. That must be true love. It's not about where you work, Sugar said, taking his hand again, but who you're with. O'Brien nodded, pride shining in his eyes. She's more than just a bartender, Michael. She's my partner in every sense. Together, we've been able to improve the place. It was her idea to start the Late Night Eats restaurant, and there are beautiful beaches just 20 miles away. We keep a condo at Jack's Beach for when I want to relax by the ocean. Sugar chimed in, I even convinced him to hire a real assistant manager, so he only has to work 4 nights a week. I thought about getting him to retire with me, but this bar is his passion. I doubt I'll ever fully take him away from it. I'm happy for both of you, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. But I do have one question. With you being so tall and O'Brien being shorter, how do you two? She just smiled warmly. He's perfect for reaching all the right places. O'Brien blushed, and we shared a laugh, but it didn't last long. I met some sailors during my travels, I said, suddenly feeling the weight of the conversation shift. They told me there are feelings you can't explain. Times when the weather looks fine, and everything appears calm, yet as you stand on the deck of a ship looking at the smooth water, a strange sensation creeps up your spine. It moves through your stomach, and you feel a chill at the back of your neck. Even in the calm, you sense a breeze from nowhere beginning to stir the sea. The atmosphere thickened as I continued. Your eyes search for movement beneath the surface. The ship gently sways beneath you. They called it the dark seas. If you ever feel it, they said, it's best to head to the nearest shore because something strange is about to happen. When I asked them why I hadn't heard about this phenomenon before, they simply said that those who didn't escape didn't live to tell their stories. I had never known of such things happening on land, but now I felt that unsettling chill wash over me. I turned to my old friend. You need to ask for help right now, O'Brien. I know you were strong once, but that was 40 years ago. When this is over, you will regret not taking action. Sugar looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, clearly aware of the seriousness of my words. When this is over, you can have your chance, O'Brien said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. It's been a long time, but I've never backed away from a challenge. You're welcome to try, Michael, but there are things you don't understand. If I get hurt, it will matter to me. Just then, I felt a presence behind me. Hello, Michael. I turned to face someone I had known well once, years ago. Time had added depth to her features, and her striking red hair framed her face beautifully. She wore a simple red dress that accentuated her shape. Why are you here, Deirdre? Why won't you leave me alone? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back, my heart racing. I know what happened to your friends 5 years ago. I'm truly sorry. I never meant for any of that to happen. I don't trust your words, I shot back, my defenses up. When you speak, I sense lies. Can we sit down and talk? The short answer is no. Michael, please. Just a few minutes? I can't spare even a moment for you. What can I say to make you talk? The air between us crackled with unresolved tension, and I could feel the eyes of Sugar and O'Brien on me, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. But as I faced Deirdre, I felt that chill return, wrapping around me like a heavy fog. I knew this was far from over. "Just say goodbye to me," Deirdre said softly, taking a step back and sinking into one of the small tables at the bar. The atmosphere felt charged, thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. "Please, Michael," she continued, her eyes pleading. "Let me say what I need to say. Let's find a way to move on, and then you can leave again. I promise I won't come looking for you." I shook my head, feeling the familiar wall of distrust rise up inside me. "Sorry, Deirdre, but I've told you before, I don't trust you." "What harm could it do?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "What harm did it do to see you with him at the conference in Bailey's office? You could have chosen something more considerate. You didn't have to be so obvious, but you were. So why would sitting here and talking with you be any different?" "It would feel like fire on my skin," I replied sharply, my heart racing. "I chose to give that up for Lent. I wish there was a way I could show you how sorry I am for my actions," she said, her voice lowering to a whisper. "You know I was only 22 then. He was my first love, the man I dreamed would be the father of my children." "Good luck with that," I shot back, bitterness lacing my words. "Have you never done anything you regret?" "Don't forget, we used to talk," she countered, her eyes narrowing. "I know what you were like. I know about the choices you made when you were younger. Do you ever think about the woman in Cuba? The one you left behind?" The mention of her hit hard, twisting my insides. "You're really going to bring her up? After all this time? You said yourself that you weren't very nice," she retorted, crossing her arms. "I was young, Deirdre. That's what makes it different. Being 22 and married for 2 years isn't the same as being a reckless teenager. You were an adult," she said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were doing." I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my emotions at bay. "I deserved better from you, Deirdre. I was a good husband. I loved you and trusted you, but nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. You got what you asked for." I could feel the weight of the surrounding table's gazes on us, curious and judgmental. O'Brien, standing behind me, cleared his throat. "You need some space, Mike. I'll open the restaurant for you. It's not ready for customers yet." "That's fine, O'Brien. I'm leaving," I said, feeling the weight of his presence press down on me. He gently grasped my wrist, his grip firm yet reassuring. "You've been avoiding this for 10 years, Mike. It's time to face it. Do this so you can let go of the past and start fresh." "I haven't been running, O'Brien." "Not from her," I insisted. Yet the truth lingered, a dark shadow in the back of my mind. "In 10 years, you still haven't found someone to care for," he said, his voice steady. "You might call it something else, but I see it as running." He was mistaken. I wasn't running, I was just living my life. But as I glanced at Deirdre, the question nagged at me, could she hurt me more than she already had? "It'll only take a few minutes," I said finally, feeling a strange mix of resolve and vulnerability. "Maybe if I'm honest, she'll set me free." 10 minutes, I decided, walking toward the restaurant with O'Brien leading the way. A moment later, I noticed Deirdre beside me, then slightly ahead. I shut my eyes, trying to push away the painful memories. But when I opened them again, she was still there, an unwelcome reminder of my past. The doors swung open, likely pushed by Sugar from the bar, revealing a diner that looked like it could stay open all night, the kind you find near bus stations. A long countertop lined with coffee pots stretched across the back, and the faint sounds of the kitchen filled the air. The plastic seats and red checkered tablecloths seemed so ordinary, yet they were a backdrop for the extraordinary conversation that was about to unfold. O'Brien called out to the staff, "Stay in the kitchen for a bit, everyone. We'll open later tonight. I have customers who need some privacy first." He walked away, leaving Deirdre and me alone in the midst of our unspoken history. She leaned back against a table, her posture casual yet tense. "What's so important that we have to talk face to face, Michael? What else is left to say? Why didn't you take the 10 million the first or second time in Guatemala?" I asked, desperate to understand her choices. "And why did you offer it the second time?" "You know the reason," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not long after you left, I finally saw what kind of man he really was. I realized I'd been foolish to fall for good looks. The only thing Julian valued about me was my money. My father had warned me about him, saying he was selfish and only focused on himself. He was never kind to women." She paused, smoothing her dress, gathering her thoughts. "I put up with his behavior for a while because I thought I deserved it. I left a good man for someone who seemed charming at first. But soon, I knew he had to go. You know how he tried to hurt me. I should have realized from his actions toward you that he'd treat me the same way." Deirdre's eyes softened as she spoke. The good part was, Julian often didn't see his own weaknesses. He could have handled things in much simpler ways, but he chose to take unnecessary risks. I listened, surprised that she burned that first check. "I see now why you did it. You were showing your feelings in the only way you knew how. But I had hoped that after 5 years, your anger would fade and you'd take the money. It was the only way I could try to make up for the pain I caused you." "Blood money, Deirdre," I said, shaking my head. "Sometimes money is the only way to say you're sorry." "It's not enough," she replied, her voice trembling. "It never was." She stood up, determination in her eyes. "So this is it. We're finished. You don't believe people can change or improve themselves, even after everything you've been through." "Maybe people can change," I admitted, feeling the walls closing in. "Maybe you're not who you were before, but I don't care." The sadness on her face was the response I'd hoped for over the past decade. It felt like the perfect ending to my last visit to Jacksonville. I was ready to leave, but a part of me hesitated. She would never understand my pain unless I explained it. "You know about my father. I've talked about him a lot, but I don't know if I ever shared much about his life before he worked for your father. He started in the oil fields of West Texas when he was just 14. He became a millionaire 3 times before I turned 10, only to lose everything each time. He loved that lifestyle, but he said it wasn't fair to my mother. She wanted stability, a steady paycheck, a home. So he worked for your father, which allowed him to travel and give Mom the stability she craved." I paused, remembering the bittersweet memories. It only lasted a few years before she passed away, but he liked his job and stayed. After he lost a lot of money, we had to stay with. My voice trailed off as I realized I had been talking too much, revealing too much of my heart. Deirdre watched me, her expression a mix of understanding and sorrow. "Michael," she said softly, "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to explain, to make you see why I made the choices I did." As the weight of our shared history hung in the air, I realized that perhaps there was a way to finally let go. Maybe this was the moment we both needed to find closure, to accept our pasts and move on. With a heavy heart but a lighter spirit, I took a deep breath. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Deirdre. And maybe one day, we can forgive each other." As I turned to leave, the door swung shut behind me, marking the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. One of my mother's aunts had passed away, and understandably, Mom was distraught. It was hard for her, losing family when money was tight, and I could see the strain it put on her. One evening, my father sat down with me to talk openly about finances. He made a comparison that stuck with me. He said money was like food, water, or air. When you're starving, thirsty, or gasping for breath, nothing else matters. But when you have enough, you hardly think about it. "Son, you'll never have to worry about money," he reassured me, looking deep into my eyes. "You have my talent. I may not be able to smell oil underground, but I can sense it. People think I'm a little strange, but I know what I know. And you'll inherit that same gift. Once you prove yourself, Many people will open doors for you. So don't let money be your concern. People fight over it, but in the end, it's not what makes a good life. The real measure is the memories you create, the people you love, and the impact you leave behind. He knelt beside me in that old house, his voice steady and calm. If I were to pass away tonight with just the coins in my pockets, I wouldn't feel poor. I've loved your mother, and I've loved you. Everything else is just dust. Even 30 years later, I could almost hear his words echoing in my mind. He was the smartest and kindest man I ever knew, and I never forgot the lessons he taught me. Part of the reason I turned down your checks, Deirdre, was to challenge you. But the main reason is that no amount of money can replace what you took from me. I don't understand, Deirdre said, her voice laced with confusion. I know you never have understood, I replied, my voice low. I never wanted to feel for you what I did, yet you made me long for things I never wanted, a home, a family, a life. I dreamed of seeing the world and always coming back to you. I pictured our children, a little boy with red hair and a little girl with the same fiery locks. In my mind, I could see them perfectly. It's been 10 years, Deirdre, and sometimes, just sometimes, I still dream of them. But they stay toddlers, they never grow, and they never will because they will never be born. They are reminders of a life I'll never have, and that's why I feel this anger towards you. Why I can't forgive you, no matter how much money you offer. You took that future from me. I turned to leave, heading toward the door that led to the bar, my hand raised to knock. Then I felt her hand on my shoulder, her touch unusually warm. She stroked the back of my neck and traced the scar there. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of turning to face her. That scar gives you a strong look, Michael. I wonder how many people appreciate it, she said, her voice smooth yet probing. I lifted my hand to knock again, hoping O'Brien was ready for my signal. So you really feel this way about me, Michael? Fine. I'm a businesswoman, maybe we can make a deal. If you won't take the 10 million all at once, perhaps I can pay it off in parts. I knocked on the door, trying to focus on what lay ahead. If you're ever back in Jacksonville for work, you're welcome to visit my estate in St. Augustine. I remember you liked staying there, the rooms are still great, and Andre is still my personal chef. He made duck à l'orange tonight, your favorite. I'd only ask for $1,000 per night from what you owe. You wouldn't even have to see me if you don't want to, I'll keep my distance. I moved her hand away from my face, my irritation flaring. You are really mistaken, Deirdre, if you think I'd come anywhere near you willingly. You can enjoy my company whenever you want, but I think you'll see that this experience is worth a lot more. Finally, the door swung open, and I stepped outside. The bar was getting crowded, but I spotted Sugar and O'Brien behind the counter. An empty stool beckoned me, and I focused on it. Just one drink to forget that conversation, then I'm leaving. I closed my eyes, but I could still feel her presence behind me. Before you go, Michael, I'd like you to come to my limo. I have something for you. She vanished into the throng, or maybe the atmosphere had shifted, but I opened my eyes and grabbed a beer, hoping it would calm my nerves. I closed my eyes again, wishing magic was real, not the kind that brought trouble. What would my life be like if I had never met Deirdre Lancaster? I could have had a family and a home, but it wouldn't feel right because she wouldn't be there. I took a swig of my beer and turned to O'Brien. Why do I feel so uneasy about what she's waiting for me? The only way to know is to go outside and see, he said, shrugging. You know something, don't you? I didn't need to answer, he knew my father well. Still, I said, he took the memories of my mother and me. And what will you take with you when your time comes, Michael? After a moment of contemplation, I got up and walked outside. It felt like forever, and I half expected she might have already left. But there she was, crouched next to a white 2014 limo, talking to someone inside. Then she turned and walked toward me, exuding an air of confidence I had never seen before. "You couldn't say no. Can we just get this over with, Deirdre? Tell me what the big secret is and let me get back to my drink," I said, impatience creeping into my voice. She wore a slight smile, but her expression was hard to read. Behind her, I noticed a young woman getting out of the back seat, and on the other side stood a large man in a black suit. Deirdre moved aside, and my breath caught as I saw a little boy holding the young woman's hand. Sometimes the world shifts suddenly, and everything you knew disappears, like morning dew evaporating under the sun. He had the same bright red hair as Deirdre, coupled with the sturdy build of a young child. He wore shorts and a Jacksonville Jaguars t-shirt, innocent and full of life. "He's yours," she said, her voice steady. I know you might not believe this, but as I looked into the boy's eyes, my own eyes, I didn't need proof. He looked just like me from the early pictures my parents had shown me. I had no idea how she had managed this, but she claimed she had a special gift. I studied him, taking in every detail of his face and stance. He was looking at me closely, holding the hand of the woman I had once loved and lost. In that moment, everything I thought I knew shattered, and I was left standing there, trying to comprehend the life that had been taken from me and the possibility of a future I never thought I'd have. As I watched him, I couldn't help but feel a mix of protectiveness and concern for the young boy who seemed to be taking care of himself. He didn't appear scared, just cautious, which I could understand. I was a big guy, and the scar running across my face likely made me look less than friendly. I noticed the bodyguard moving around the back of the car, his expression serious, as anyone should be when tasked with protecting something so valuable. I crouched down on one knee to be closer to Michael's height, hoping it would make me seem less intimidating. "You're my daddy, right?" he asked, his voice small yet curious. "I am," I replied gently, feeling a rush of emotions as I realized this was our first moment together. "I've seen you in pictures. Mommy has them at home. What's your name?" he inquired. "Michael Orion McCarthy. Orion is for my grandpa." I glanced at Deirdre, who had completely changed my life in just 30 minutes. Moments ago, I was living my own life, but now I was an orphan, no parents, no spouse, no kids. I could take risks because my life was mine alone, but now everything was different. Someone else's life was intertwined with mine. I reached out my hand slowly to him. "I'm sorry I haven't been here, Michael. Mommy explained that I'm very busy, that I travel a lot and do important things. But she said I'd come someday. I'm really happy I came today. I won't leave you alone anymore." In an instant, he rushed into my arms, and I tried to hold him gently. After a moment, he pulled back and exclaimed, "You're really big, Daddy." My grandpa, Father Patrick McCarthy, was big too. "And you will be one day." Just then, Deirdre came up behind me, taking Michael's hand gently. "It's getting late, Michael. You still need to eat, brush your teeth, and get ready for bed. Say goodbye to your father. Can you come home and tuck me in? Read me a story?" "Mommy reads me a story every night," he pleaded, his eyes wide with hope. "I guess that depends on your mother," I replied hesitantly. Deirdre handed him over to the nanny, saying, "Let me talk to your father for a moment. He may be able to visit, but you need to get ready for bed." The bodyguard and the nanny helped Michael into his car seat, and the bodyguard took the wheel. As the nanny closed the door, Michael waved goodbye, and I felt a pang in my chest. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and I could smell rain in the air. We moved under the awning in front of O'Brien's as the summer storms were about to roll in from the beach. It was typical for this time of year, with the weather often shifting unexpectedly. Deirdre faced me, her red hair dancing in the wind, a look of concern etched on her face. "How is this possible?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I could do a blood test, but we both know it might be needed." "But how could this happen?" "I just don't know how to tell you without making you feel worse," she continued, her eyes searching mine for understanding. "I knew you wanted children, Michael, but I was still in love with Julian. I thought, no, I was sure he would come back for me. But then you kept getting me pregnant. So you didn't want to tell me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't want to worry you or make you feel trapped," she replied, her tone softer now. "I chose not to end any of the 3 pregnancies. I was raised Catholic. But with enough help, you could have the embryos saved for later." I took a deep breath, processing everything she was revealing. "What made you change your mind?" "After what happened in Guatemala, I realized you weren't coming back. I've been with other men since Julian, but I never met anyone I wanted to be serious with. Then I realized I still had a part of you. I might never see you again, but I could see you in him. So I tried, and Michael was born. And you didn't think to tell me?" My voice was edged with frustration. "You tore up my letters and ignored all my attempts to reach you. Even if I had managed to tell you, would you have believed me without meeting him?" "Probably not," she admitted, looking down for a moment. "So what now?" "That's up to you," she said, her voice steady. "He is your son. I won't agree to shared custody, and if you try, I will stop you. But you can see him whenever you're in Jacksonville. If you want to take him on short trips, feel free." "How many guards will come along?" I asked, my tone skeptical. "None. He is your son, and why wouldn't I just take him and disappear, leaving you to search for him?" She countered, stepping closer, the night deepening around us. "Because you're a good man, Michael McCarthy. You wouldn't take a son away from his mother. You wouldn't hurt him." "You're very confident," I replied, feeling the weight of her words. As the wind blew dust across the street, the noise from the bar faded, and it felt like we were alone in the world. "You remember that tape recording you played that day in Bailey's office?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "I told you I had feelings for you, and that was true. I didn't want to love Julian when I met you, but I did. I didn't want to hurt you, but I did. That doesn't change the fact that I know the kind of man you are." I turned to walk back inside, drawn to the light and laughter that contrasted sharply with the heavy memories of my past. "Michael," she called out, stopping me in my tracks. "What I need is something to make me feel better. Can you visit the estate tonight? Michael will be sad if you don't come. Plus, I have some papers for you to look at." "Papers?" Doubt washed over me as memories resurfaced. "Guardianship papers." My heart sank. "I hope you will agree to be Michael's guardian," she said, her voice steady. "What does that mean?" I asked, confusion clouding my mind. "If something happens to me, if I pass away before he turns 21, I want you to take care of him. This means handling his finances. I don't expect anything to happen, and you won't have any duties as long as I'm here." She paused, studying my expression. I felt overwhelmed. "You're the only man I've known who didn't care about my wealth or my company. If I'm gone, I know you will look after Michael because he is your son." I was about to push open the door when she said from behind me, "My limo left. Can you give me a ride to the estate? There's a storm coming tonight. Andre promised a great meal with his duck à l'orange, and he knows you really like his cooking. You can enjoy a good dinner, say goodnight to Michael, and we can wrap up our plans." I closed the door behind me and walked her to my rented car. Inside the bar, 2 people watched as the man and woman got into the vehicle. "What do you think?" Sugar O'Brien asked, his brow furrowed. "She seems lost," came the reply. As we pulled away, I glanced at Dira, wondering how we had ended up in this complicated dance of fate. The storm was on the horizon, but so were new beginnings, if I could find a way to navigate the storm ahead.